Microhabitats are everywhere. You've got any number of possibilities here with incoming tide. You can see what it does to the sand as it comes in and goes out. And it's just never ending. That Corvina that Lou had on, by the way, was right here. Imagine what kind of opportunities that presented on the incoming tide as it swept around that corner. Fish was just sitting there waiting for just fly to sweep off that ledge. And that's his mangrove tree. He got sucked in there. Why don't you go find his rod? But it's a labyrinth back in there. We didn't even know. We'd actually come up in here, and we'd gone up in here, and we said, well, does this take us back out? Because we wanted to come down to this estro here. We weren't sure. We could have actually come down here. Instead, we went all the way out and had to come all the way around. It was the one day I didn't take my chart. I just had an idea where we were going.
How many acres would you say that encompasses right there?
Oh, this is probably close to 1.5 miles of water.
Oh, okay, never mind.
1.5 miles of water.
I had a smaller picture in mind.
It's huge. The main channel over to the Sand Island that we were looking at before is over here. That's the main channel. These islands are all pretty good size. There's deep, big flows, deep holes, shallow areas where they spawn and feed, and then they'll drain when the tide goes out. Pretty neat. Deeper's better. There's one of those bright flies. That's a Ricky fly. Yeah, that's a nice Corvina. And they were big. I didn't catch any really that big. That was the average size I was getting. But who cares? There were lots of them. They can throw them back. They actually killed a couple for dinner. They weren't as good as the halibut though. Heavier flies enable you to get into a specific spot. You can just plop it in there. It goes straight down. If you're going to work along a series of mangroves, then use the heavy line to get it down with a lighter fly so it can drift along the bottom. Get that concept? Heavy fly to plummet in, then you can even use an intermediate line because you're plopping, drop plopping, and the other one you go the other way around so that it'll actually feather along the bottom. And you carry the combination of the two of them with you so that you can mix and match. Sometimes you want a heavy fly and a heavy line to get them down. You know, if you're in one of those real deep main channels with 2 knots of current, it has to be down now. Bullet weight, everything, not fun to throw, but it gets down. And it's in the zone. And being in the zone, getting down there is everything. And most all of our fish are on the bottom. Snook, probably the exception. But it's too long. The outsides of the bends. This is actually the estro that Gary likes to fish. The camp was right across the river, and this was spotted bass territory. I didn't know those guys ever figured out what was going on back there, but all the way down the coast for the next mile is nothing but spotted bass 2 at a time. And they were all like this. All of them.
I mean 2 at a time. You were
2 flies on the line.
doing really good.
A shrimp pad on the bottom, worm on the top, this far apart.
Wow.
And then later 2 fish at a time, you'd get boom, and then just leave it there, count to 10, and boom, it'd get heavier. And those are all 14-pound tests, up to 20, didn't matter. They were just going to hit it. It's crazy. But the outsides of the bends, you can see in the water, it makes that turn, that's where it's going to be. And same thing down here, up and around here, same thing. You can stand there and fish those bends when the tide goes out, same thing there. All the way up in these little tiny creeks, and there are fish back up in there. A little hard to cast to them sometimes, but you can get at some of them. And this area here, this is probably 100, 150 yards across that flat and channel. It's pretty big water. And you can drift in with the tide, and you can drift out with the tide. Home for lunch. Catch the next tide. Let that work for you. If you're battling it the other way, then you're paddling to work hard to get up against that stream, making more noise, and then you've got to drift back against it. You're going the wrong way. The current, you can just fish, not even do anything. The paddle stays stowed the whole time. Or your engine off if you're in a ponga or something. Let the current do the work. Use a push pole to position your boat, whatever you want to use, just like you'd use in the Keys. Simple. Or paddle, just a little something. Using the current. Saves a lot of paddling. Change locations to maximize the current flow at the key holding areas. If I want those specific bends in an area where I really think looks good, I got to plan to be there when that tide starts to move on it so that I get the maximum effect out of the reason I went there in the first place. Kind of important. Change locations to maximize travel during slack water to meet the next tide. Right? It's nothing going either way. It should be easy. And you got to factor the wind into that too. Here we had that northwest wind, and so it's better to go upwind early and take the wind home. In fact, you make a sailing rig for your kayak. You can go a long way up with it, sail home, without even putting a paddle in the water. Really smart. And that was the average sized bass. And that's a big one in San Diego, right? 1 to 2 pound bass is a big bass. And that was pretty much average. There were a lot of smaller ones too, but the average ones, we had bass to 5 pounds. 5 pound spotties, that's a huge spotty. But that means there's plenty of food. And for some reason there was a bunch of flat area over there and they weren't dredging for shrimp over there, which is why the bass were still there. It became really apparent they were doing the deep water thing for the shrimp, right? Trawling. And they weren't doing the shallow flats for obvious reasons because they pick up all kinds of snags and everything else. But the bass were more than happy. The good populations of bass were definitely where they weren't doing it. The bahas and bocas are dangerous waters. There's a lot of current. There's a lot of wind because it's more exposed, and there are larger fish, mainly Disneyland creatures, that you need to be aware of there. You have to study the entradas. You want to paddle out. Most of them are elevated grounds, as you can tell from the satellite pictures we looked at earlier, and we're going to look at again. You sit above there, you can get a pretty good idea what's going on. An incoming tide is going to bring bait fish into your bait species. The outgoing tide takes food to the big boys sitting outside, so you're going to be watching for rips in the current, birds, and boiling fish. They are going to be on the surface. And of course those things work the edges of all those currents, work the edges of the vertical drops. The current, we'll look at a couple of those. Don't get locked in just because you think that's going to produce fish. If it isn't doing it, change. Plan B. Each day when you go to one place, whether it's in Magdalena Bay, whether you're walking the beach here or on a trout stream, anybody like to sit in that one hole because they caught 100 fish there last year or whatever? Yeah, well, I always catch a big fish here. Well, they're not there, or they're not biting, or somebody took him out because you put him back. Move on. Find your adventure somewhere else. Don't get locked in, because you'll generally miss the tide when you're being out of position for the rest of your day. And have an escape plan. If it gets ugly and you're out there fishing, you need to know which way you're going. It may not be towards home. It may need to be safety downwind. Right? You need to know where you're going to go and what you're going to do, and have the equipment with you, as when we talk about safety, that you can spend the night by yourself while everything calms down before you head back to camp the next morning or later in the evening, whatever it happens to be. So a headlamp, your wind jacket needs to be with you, maybe some matches, right? Plenty of water, some food, so you're not going to starve. Little things like that. But you may need to get out of there with these bocas, right? Because it gets too windy. Some of the pangueras won't even go out through them. It gets really rough on the outgoing tide against the wind. Huge, huge. You can see on these bocas here, this is outgoing tide against the wind. Those are serious breakers. And you can tell where the current's coming from, right along the shore, right in here. You can see which way it goes when it comes in. And the pattern of the wind, where it's going to be rougher in here because of the wind versus out of the wind, closer to the shore. You get up here and watch it for a while, or cycle, or down here. Your outgoing tide is making a wall. There's an edge line right there. This is probably not sand. It's not a sandbar. That's current against wind, making all these edges.
What's the dimension there? What's the size of the mountain?
This one is wide. This is probably close to a mile across here.
This is taken from Google Earth?
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
And those are huge waves to be able to see it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's nasty stuff.
All caused by current. I think maybe some shallow water in here, and maybe a little pushing off the bottom. But this is definitely shallow here. There's a bar here. As it comes over here, you can see the piling up. The wind is piling water up on the bar, so you know what that's doing to the fish. There are going to be fish off the edge of that, for sure, and around these tips where they've got a little protection and they can just sit there without fighting current. Without an incoming tide, for example. So you got your hands whether you're wide exposed. If it gets too gnarly, you may have to back off, come back into here and rest, or go around the corner and get out of it. The nice part about being down here, though, there's fish everywhere. You're just going to have to change your patterns and go do something else. So you don't get a white sea bass today, or the tuna that's sitting right outside there, or a shark shows up and you see that. Well, that's time to leave. You can have the tuna today. We're going to go do something else. And there's plenty of activities. I mean, just imagine an incoming tide. This is going to get a pretty good flush. It's getting everything straight on. So might be a really good place to hang out. nice deep channels and holes. We can work on either side of that. Of course, we'd have to pinpoint those ahead with our GPS, and then if you're really smart, you'll have a little fish finder with you, those like SmartCast ones. They have the wrist TV. You can carry. I carried one of those with me on the trip. It failed about day 3, but I always knew how deep where the drop-offs were, and that was really important. Or you can take another rod and just have half a spinning rod with a piece of lead on it, and you can plumb each turn of the handles 2 feet on a little tiny ultralight rig. Just use that and sound. So real tough fishing there, and that's probably a fairly calm day. The wind doesn't look anything above average. It looks like about 10 to 12 knots right there, because there are no breaking white caps on the outside. Stronger the current though, the bigger the reward. You get a lot of flow, you're going to have a lot more opportunities. And here you can see exactly what it's doing. This is probably an incoming tide from the picture. And spreading out, you're going to have a lot of flow through here. And of course on the outbound side, when it's moving north and south, a lot of opportunities. Moving water is generally the key to success in Baja and here. If you have moving water, you have fish that are feeding, because they're going to post up somewhere and wait for something to come by. Lots of possibilities here. You could spend a week fishing this and never scratch it. I mean, if you really wanted to explore it. I think you could spend 5 lifetimes here and never really understand this whole system. It's just, it's amazing. But you can certainly get a little piece of it down in a week. Like that one estro we fished there. That was probably a half a day's figuring out. But the rest of it, man, there's just so much to do. Okay. You got the blue water. It's all pretty much the 100-fathom bank, the Thetis Bank pinnacles. All these lie offshore. Late summer to fall, best you got. Talked about the Pongueros. Not every day is fishable. If you plan your trip to go down and just fish offshore, A, you're missing some of the best fishing there, and B, you may not be able to get out. You may be disappointed. Unless you have a mothership or something offshore, you're going to miss a lot of days. It's a risk versus reward if you put all your eggs in one basket with that. Because even if you can get off, standing up on a boat to fly fish in those conditions isn't going to be fun for most people, and nor is it going to be safe. And safety is not something they really take seriously in Mexico. Very few regulations other than you can't kill somebody. And even then, if it happens as part of an accident, well, that's just too bad. Right? And I presume it's getting better somewhere, like La Paz is great, but other than that, I wouldn't do it. Staying closer to home on those days is probably better. You find something else to do in the estros. Get out of the wind, say, I'm just going to have fun fishing. Be in one piece, not be puking up my lunch. It's a whole lot better. Especially in the early and late seasons when you're not dealing with the rest of that. Looking for bait fish. This is all bait fish. All bait fish. And that's a banner day to be out there. I mean, you couldn't ask for more to be on a day like that, waiting for somebody to show up to munch. Being upwind of the whole thing, up current, letting the fish come to you. They'll come right to you. Slash the boat going right to them.
Looks like a ponga.
It is. Yeah, you might find some of those guys hanging out. Yellowfin.
Roosters.
Roosties. A lot of fun. They'll normally sit a little closer in. And then you get the wahoo.
Oh.
That is a classic fish there. That's some really good eating too. Wire leaders for him. Talked about it not always being a fun day to be out there. Pretty nice loop considering the conditions. He's getting some cheering from his partner there. So you can see it's starting to white cap, so the wind is probably up to about 12 knots in that range someplace. So they're a ways offshore. Safety, the thing to remember is that you're on your own down there. You're responsible for yourself and your buddies, and you got to go with the weakest link. If some guy is a 12-year-old in a kayak, well, you're not going to take him out through the bocas to go fish for tuna, because he doesn't have the stamina to make it back. Likewise, even in day excursions, you got to keep track of the last guy in the party. And ideally, you should always be fishing with somebody else, both not only from a standpoint of something happens to the boat or anything else, but in case you find banditos or something that's not going well, at least you got somebody else. Maybe you can both hide and split up, and somebody can tell the story. Just remember, you're on your own. Anything you need, you got to take with you. If it's first aid kit, If it's communications, you have to take it with you. The language barrier can be solved either by learning keywords in Spanish and or taking a phrase book and a dictionary, because you can do pointy talkie if you get stuck, right? For various things like you need food or transportation, you can open up the book and point to it in the dictionary and the guy will know exactly what you're talking about. I highly recommend that in any country you travel to. Make sure you have some basic phrases down, and like, where's the bathroom, right, ladies? Where's the bathroom? Benjo wa doka desu ka? I know where the bathrooms are and how to get there. Film, water, food, trains, anything you need. Have your phraseology and have at least a dictionary with you where you can pointy talkie so you can communicate. Really important, because most people don't speak English there. Then when you get to Mag Bay, most don't, and of course that's changing, especially during whale watching season when you get a lot of the guides coming in. VHF radio coverage is spotty. The guys are using it in the boats, but it's in Spanish, right? But you can call for assistance on it and get it. They're on usually international channel 69 and 72. So you'll generally find them there. Ask the port captain before you leave if you're going out on a trip, or some of the guides. They'll know. You can even call them up if you're going to make your own trip. You're going to rent a kayak in La Paz and drive over and do it yourself for a week, which is totally doable and probably pretty safe. Even if you were to do that, you'd want to know the frequencies that they're working. And you can sort that out for yourself. Buddy system we talked about. If somebody gets in trouble, there's somebody there to bail you out. Whether it's getting sucked under the mangroves or tangling with a really big fish, trying to get a, you know, if you run into a swordfish out there just outside the boca, which is entirely possible, as that bait is all getting sucked out of there on the outgoing tide, and you've got a sailfish or a marlin on the end of your line, you're going to want some help. You don't want to have him in the kayak by yourself without somebody standing by in case you have problems with that sword. Right? You got to be able to free that fish or have somebody else cut that line for you. They need some help. Trip plans. File a trip plan. Everybody, before you leave the country, you should know where you're going to be, when you're going, when you're coming back. For the trip with Gary's trip, we know when we're leaving the hotel in La Paz and when we're coming back. And then we leave a plan with the embassy too, so they know you're there in the country. And you make sure you close those plans when you come back. You call them up and let them know you actually got back. It's really important. Gary carries a satellite phone, which is a really smart thing. If you're going to go down there, and especially any large group besides your own safety, take a satellite phone, rent one. You can rent them, so that no matter where you are, you can phone home. You can get help if you need it. If you got banditos, you can give them, that's why you got the hand-held GPS. We're right here, we're under assault. There's 20 of them and they're all wearing black. We're in deep kimchi, these are our last coordinates. Come and get us. We're E and E and we're ditching the kayaks, we're wading in the mangroves. We'll call you on the 12s. We'll be on the radio on the 12s, keeping in mind some of the good guys aren't always the good guys down there. A lot of the guys that are in the constabulary are part of the problem. Yeah. So keep that in mind. And there's your State Department may have specific requirements from time to time about going different places, not just necessarily Mag Bay, and warnings, and for assistance if you need things with passports.